Thomas More, I cannot tell you how much I am looking forward to this conversation. I've been interested in talking to you for quite some time. Welcome to the show. It's wonderful to meet you. Welcome on.
Thank you very much, Dan. I'm happy to be here too.
Likewise. I always like to start with guests kind of at the beginning, and I did a fair amount of research about your own biography over the last week or so, and I thought it might be interesting and important to start at you as a young man. And I know you are someone who, from reading about your life, took religion very seriously when you were really a boy and a young adult and were close to becoming an ordained priest. In as broad of a way to kind of ask this, I'm just curious if you might be able to tell that story of what you remember about a young Thomas More and what resonated with you about religion and Catholicism back then.
I think it began when I when I was born into a very devout Roman Catholic family in Detroit, Michigan, and an Irish Catholic family. And I went to school at a Catholic school and attended a Catholic church. And I was an altar boy. I was very close to the priests. And by the time I was 13, I had been drawn into that life. And many of the young men ahead of me, went off to a seminary to study to be a priest. And I did the same. My parents wanted me to wait a while, but I was just fired up. I just wanted to do that. So I did. And the priests that I joined were what's called a religious mendicant order. It means that they were sort of half monks and half parish priests. And so as a student, since I wasn't a parish priest for 13 years, I lived the life of a monk, essentially. And I loved it. I loved that life very much. I studied hard. I got a good education in the classics. It was a very liberal-minded order, emphasis on really fine learning. And I took many of my philosophy courses in Latin. I studied Greek for 4 years. So it was a very classical education. But I awoke one morning when I was 26 and felt that whatever had inspired me to do this had gone. And so I left. And I had studied music as a monk, and I loved that too. So I thought I might be a musician, but that didn't quite work out. And I eventually got a PhD in religious studies from Syracuse University. It was a wonderful program I was in. And so I got a very good education there, and thought I would be a professor for the rest of my life. But I was actually not given tenure when I was after 7 or 8 years there, and I became a psychotherapist. But I was interested in religion then in a very broad sense, very broad, very different way from when I entered the monks.
Yeah. And when you were a teenager and this was something, obviously you must have been a precocious kid that you were thinking about dedicating your life to, you just said this, that you loved the life of a monk. What did you like? What did you love about it? And what about it attracted you to that kind of life in the first place?
I liked the priests that I knew. I thought they were terrific, and I liked their lifestyle. I liked everything about them. I don't know, that was the main thing. I liked being in their company. I liked being involved with the Catholic rituals and liturgy and the whole thing. I liked all that very much. I was drawn to it. I don't know why, but I was very drawn to it, and I like I think I still feel like I'm a monk. So I think at that time, even though I'm married with children, and I think what I liked was the combination of solitude and community. I'm not a terribly, I mean, some people disagree with me, but I don't feel that I'm a very sociable person.
Yeah.
And I like solitude. I like being on my own. And I think that the monk's life offers a lot of solitude, although also community life. Yeah. So I was able to have both things. I didn't have to work at being sociable because I had a community right there. I was part of a very
Yeah.
intense community. So it was just perfect for me.
I have had so many conversations with friends of mine who are, roughly my age. They're millennials, they're in their 30s, who were born like I was in a, religious environment. And some people took it seriously from an early age, some didn't. I did. And eventually left. I think it's one of the, better known facts about the young in the country is just how many people have left organized religion. You said this, a bit ago that, I think you said at age 26, you woke up and something had left you. What was that? Was that a belief in the ideology and the structure of Catholicism? What do you make sense, or how do you make sense of what exactly had left you at that time?
Well, yes, I felt that this was in the late '60s and '70s, believe it
Yeah.
or not, and so it was a time of great change. That particular those 5 or 7 years where the world felt like it was really changing radically,
Yeah.
and I was changing, and I wanted to explore new philosophies and new things, new ways of thinking. And the Catholic Church, I felt it was also trying to keep up with the times, but it didn't manage quite to do it. And I felt, at that time when I left, I felt that I couldn't represent the church,
Hmm.
honestly.
Hmm. I know too that you alluded to this as well, and I knew this from reading some about your biography that at the end of what is, even if it's enjoyable, it's an extremely long educational process to get to the point where you are up for tenure. And I think that was at SMU, if I remember correctly, that
Yeah, that's right.
when that's denied, you know, I'm wondering, and I want to get into, Jung and a lot of the, Jungian concepts that
Yeah.
I would imagine you were eventually, influenced by. But
Yes.
talk to me about that moment. Was that a massive blow to you, or did you have a bit of a sense that this is the start of something new and even better?
Well, both. I actually, at first, I thought it was a massive blow
Yeah.
more than anything. I didn't know what to do because I loved being a college professor. I loved being on campus and that life too. I liked that very much. I expected to do that for the rest of my life. I was absolutely shocked when the chairman of the department told me, who was a good friend of mine, told me that they had voted me out. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? And he said, well, he could help me try to find something, or I could appeal or something like that. And I told him, no, I got the message. Um, I have this fanciful idea of my own about mythology that when the angel speaks, I obey, I
Mm,
follow. There's a great story from Islam about that, where the angel appears and the person has to jump in a river. I mean, you just do whatever has to be done.
mm,
That's what I felt. This was the voice of my fate speaking to me, saying, "Move on."
mm,
And so I didn't pay any attention to all of his caveats and suggestions. I just thought that he doesn't understand it. He's speaking for the angel right now, and he's
mm,
telling me to go on in my life. And so I did that. I was very faithful to that voice, and I didn't look back at all. I just left the university, and um, people began asking me to be their therapist. And I had training when I was in the university, not so much to be a therapist, but I trained as a therapist so that I could teach better, more
mm.
psychologically aware. And so I was ready. I was able to get a license immediately and start practicing.
Yeah.
And I've been
So
doing that ever since.
the yeah, I think you said that your PhD was in religious studies, and um one of my favorite interviews I have done in the couple years that I've been doing the show was with Jim Hollis, and it's also one of the ones that clearly has resonated more than most in terms of the public imagination. This is another reason why I was so interested in talking to you.
Mhm.
And for yourself at that time, when you're transitioning away from academia, as you said, you're listening to the angels, and jumping into what I'm sure was a pretty unclear path of what eventually would happen to you in your life. What did you know about Jung at that time, or the primary foundations of that general worldview? Were you already fairly well steeped in that, or was that something you had to go explore?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly when I first really read Jung. I think it may have been when I was in college, still in the monastic life,
Hmm.
and I had some professors who were teaching counseling psychology. I think I read Jung then, but just some basic, introduction to him. And I was very interested in Abraham Maslow and transpersonal psychology. I thought when I went to Syracuse, I would probably do my dissertation on one of those fellows, one of those guys working in transpersonal psychology. But my very first seminar was about Jung, and I was assigned to read the collected works of Jung. That's 20 volumes or 18 volumes, a very, very dense work. And I loved it. I ate it up. And so I got very much into Jung there at Syracuse. So when I was teaching at the university later, of course, I was very involved with other Jung. I wasn't a Jungian. I've never been a Jungian myself.
Yeah.
I figured I knew what it was like to be a Catholic, and I didn't want to become another something. I didn't want another pope like Pope Jung. I didn't want that. So I avoided being a Jungian. Sometimes people introduce me as a Jungian, but I'm not.
Hmm.
And but Jung is a big influence, and I read him all the time, always, and I respect him tremendously. But I disagree with him in certain areas as well. And I just don't want to be a follower in that regard. So I speak to Jung societies regularly, and I enjoy that very much. I just gave a talk to Jungians in Moscow, and I just love that, speaking to people all over the world who our common thread is Jung's work. And it's very deep and inexhaustible. I don't want to go on and on about it at this point, but I can say that I'm not so interested in the doctrine, the things you learn in a introductory volume on Jung. I'm interested in the more subtle and deeper things that he did.
Yeah. And I know it does seem like some of his concepts are percolating in just general culture more than maybe they were, when earlier in your life, like the concept of the shadow, like some of the archetypes that have been popularized over the last few years, to a lay audience that is completely unfamiliar with him as a man, the concepts that he espoused. And like you said, I mean, I identify with this as well as somebody who is not interested in really joining groups or being an ism in any way. How do you think he influenced you? What about his work still resonates with you? And maybe even more importantly, where is the disagreement there?
Well, the first thing, let's talk about the things that influenced me and that I really like. The very first thing that appealed to me was that when I read him, I was still in the wake of being in the monastery, and I read his book called Ion, which is about Christianity. And he took some of the ideas of Christianity, the theology and the ritual, and he deepened it by looking at it as a matter of the psyche. I don't want to say he psychologized it. He didn't do that, but he interpreted the ritual in terms of the psyche, what goes on in the psyche. I liked that very much, and it helped me because I was able then to find new value, a way into that material that I had rejected when I left the monastery. But I was able to find new life in it, really. So that was the first step. And after that, I just really loved his work on alchemy. And I don't know, all of the work he had done he used theology primarily as a resource for his psychology, which suited me fine because I knew theology. I know Latin very well, so I was able to, follow all of his work and with his Latin sources. And I felt very much at home with him. And the depth of what he did, I thought was fantastic. And the way he lived just really appealed to me, the things he did in his own life, very important to me.
Yeah. I remember this is something that I remember Jim mentioned to me during the conversation when we were talking about him, which was that I didn't know this about his own biography, that Jung was, I think, from a family of religious leaders,
Yes.
and that his father had been I think a clergyman. And Jim mentioned that in Jung's retelling of his own life, his father had crippling depressions throughout his life. And when Jung would press his father on some of the contradictions in his religious ideology, his dad would just say, we just believe. We just believe. And we don't ask those sort of questions. And I think my understanding of his analysis of his father is that, he came to, obviously it seemed like he loved his father, but had a difficult time with his father's inability to courageously address his concerns and not kind of go his own way. Is that your understanding of his life as well? Because you mentioned this too, that he has a mystical religious undertone or even overt flavor to a lot of what he says. Is that true? Is that the story you understand about his life?
To be honest, I'm not too interested in his father. I have to say, I don't know, that part of his life doesn't interest me as much as later when he lived as a magician. I wrote an article about this recently for a Jungian volume about Jung the Magus, Jung the magician, and I felt that his he learned how to do what do you call it, stone carving. He learned that. He learned how to work with stone. There was a stone quarry near him, and he learned from those experts there how to carve. And he carved, in his bowling and stone, he carved images that are very interesting and archaic and mysterious. And he wrote in many languages on that stone. So that appeals to me, the idea of magical language and secret figures. I did my dissertation on Renaissance magic, so I'm very interested in Jung as a magician and magus. And I don't hear that from Jungians. I never heard anyone talk about him that way, but I think that's who he is for me. That part appeals to me, how he lived his life magically. He wrote things in books that were, he didn't just write out notes. He wrote, as we know from the Red Book and the Black Book and other books of his, that he wrote with images and in Latin and with special calligraphy. This is all the work of magic. It's not a psychologist who is working rationally, trying to rationalize the human being. And then that was his life. He lived his life that way, making a tower, a little house for him to live in and work in, and to put stone carvings in his own house where he lived. So all of that to me is of great interest. That's what I meant when I said that I'm interested in his personal life for that reason. I don't know much. I've read Memories, Dreams, Reflections, his so-called maybe autobiographical sketches many, many times, but I'm not too interested in his early life and what influenced him that way as I am in his later life, where he really came to the fullness of his life and was able to live like in two dimensions at once. He was a mystic and a magician, and I love that. I try to do that for myself. I try to live not just on this plane. I try to live on more than one plane at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. And I was going to save this for later in the conversation, but this is a book I'm likely going to buy for my brother for Christmas, which is about archetypes, which I think we have briefly talked about today: king, warrior, magician, lover. And when you say magician about him, what do you mean by that word when you apply it to Jung and his life and what he embodied?
There's so much. I wrote it. It's what it is that there's a long tradition in the West, also in the East, but a long tradition in the Western world of magic, the people who are magicians. That is, they try, and they all say they are natural magicians. That means they're not doing supernatural things. They're trying to use the natural world and our natural abilities in a way that we have more power and that we have mysterious powers. that we can do things that are not just rationally clear, not mechanical, but that they come from understanding the secrets of nature. That's the way they talk. The magicians talk that way. And Jung understood this. He read these magicians. Paracelsus, for example, he writes about quite often in his work, who was in that tradition. So I've studied these people in that tradition quite a bit. And so for me, magic then is being in the world in such a way that you can accomplish things not in a direct mechanical way, but by mysteriously understanding the rather hidden powers in the world. For example, it's very natural. For example, to choose a good book title or a cover for a book, that takes magic. It's not rational. You can try to be rational about that and you won't get anywhere. You need to be able to somehow know how to live in this world magically, to choose the proper colors. They always discuss this: colors, images, lines, forms, words. They're magic words, words with power. That's a different way of being. And that's what the magician can do and can add to our normal life. And that's what Jung did. He was a magician. If you read him as a magus, I think you understand him a lot better than if you read him as a psychologist.
Yeah. And I want to get into your work very quickly here, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up, that you had mentioned that, he had an influence on you, but that there were also, clear disagreements that you have come to have with some of his work or his ideas. What are those? What are the things that you would, ask that people keep in mind, or just observations that you've made that you think are in conflict with him?
Many of these problems I have, I shared with my good friend James Hillman, who was a Jungian, very much more of a authentic Jungian than I've ever been. But at the same time, he was radical. He went his own way. And I followed him. We became friends when I was at Syracuse, and we were friends for 38 years. And, just had an endless conversations about these things. And so Jim thought at the beginning of his work, Hillman thought that Jung made a big mistake in equating or describing the anima and animus in terms of gender. That's one thing that I agree with him from the very beginning with Hillman, that this is a mistake to read anima and animus in Jung as having to do with the anima as the man's unconscious and the animus as the woman's unconscious. And we just let go of that, and it frees it up to talk about anybody having to deal with their soul and spirit. Try to cultivate their soul and cultivate their spirit, whatever your gender is. So that's a great relief when you do that with Jung. It's one thing. Another is that Jung tends to be monotheistic psychologically. That means that he's looking for wholeness, for the one, for the self. I don't use those words. Hillman didn't use those words. We don't talk about a self the way Hillman did, or the way Jung did. We don't talk about wholeness at all, looking for wholeness. Hillman wrote one of his first essays, was called Psychological Polytheism, which means that we're not looking for wholeness anywhere. We're looking for integration. We're looking for an acceptance and an embrace of all the multiplicity that doesn't have to be resolved within the psyche or within ourselves or our world. That is a really major different orientation toward the world. And Jung went in a very different direction. And I feel very liberated not having to go in Jung's direction in that regard.
Yeah. I know probably for most people who are familiar with you, clearly one of the ways in which they are most likely to be familiar with you is from your best-selling book, Care of the Soul. And, soul is not a word that at least I hear that much in contemporary American dialogue. And maybe just the best way to segue into this part of the conversation is because I've heard you speak in interviews about, your distinguishing definitions between spirit and soul, if I remember correctly. And it probably makes sense for me to just allow you to speak to that of answering the question, what in your mind, what is a soul? What is a human soul?
The soul is a word used. It's been used for centuries. Plato talked about the soul. Aristotle wrote a book on the soul. The people in the Renaissance that I studied talked about soul and trying to bring soul to culture. It's not a new idea. It's throughout history, but people think sometimes that this is something new that we have brought forward. No, it's not. It's very ancient, and what it means really is the mysterious source of our life. It's the mysterious soul is the mysterious source of our life that's bigger than we are, and yet at the same time is the source of our identity. It's the soul. The soul is there. I can't want to say in us. Jung said that we are in the soul. I like that better. That the soul is that source of our life, and it's bigger than us. In a way, it's who we are, and yet it's bigger than who we are. So we have a relationship to soul. And Jung was very big about that. We have to have this connection, relation to soul, but not identify with it. And yet at the same time, it does give us our sense of who we are. And it's also very mysterious. And then primarily, and this is also Jung's idea, that it shows itself in images. So like dreams, the images we have in dreams are almost like raw expressions of soul. They're very difficult to understand, but if you can really get into dreams, I mean, I've been working with dreams as a therapist now for 40 years. I just trust them so much. And I feel that that when I close my eyes, sometimes I'm just sitting around, close my eyes, immediately I'm in a dream place. I mean, like I'm in I can be in some scenario, some scene, and I don't know where it came from, but it's right there and I'm in it. And giving me the impression that I'm always in some sort of scene, imaginal scene. And that's just like a dream. It's like entering the dream world very easily. As though we're always there, but we don't know it all the time, that we are dreaming in a sense more intensely than we are waking, doing our waking life. And so that's a part of soul, that it expresses itself in images, very much like dream images. So the spirit is very different. They used to say, the philosophers have said that soul is what makes us human beings, gives us our humanity and our connection with each other. It's very deep down and deep in life. Spirit is a very different direction. It moves us away from our individuality in a way, away from our context of our lives, and toward the mysterious, which is beyond us in a way, transcendent. And so the spirit tends to the spiritual images often point to the sky, like a steeple on a church. It points to the sky and disappears up there in the sky. And so the spirit but it's wonderful. I mean, it's absolutely essential. And spirit and soul overlap, and they really need each other. And yet they're very, very different. So in my life, I have devoted myself very much to the spiritual life. In a way, I discovered soul somewhat in Jung, but I had a very soulful experience as a monk too, the community life and good times and a lot of fun and good food and all that kind of thing is part of the life of the soul.
Yeah. There are a few quotes from your book, Care of the Soul, that I'd love to read out. And there's one in particular I would love to get your feedback on. And these are just a few. Often care of the soul means not taking sides when there is a conflict at a deep level. It may be necessary to stretch the heart wide enough to embrace contradiction and paradox. The basic intention in any caring, physical or psychological, is to alleviate suffering. But in relation to the symptom itself, observance means, first of all, listening and looking carefully at what is being revealed in the suffering. And intent to heal can get in the way of seeing. And this is the one I wanted to get your thoughts on, which I think dovetails into the comment you just made. One day I would like to make up my own DSM 111 with a list of quote unquote disorders I have seen in my practice. For example, I would want to include the diagnosis, quote, psychological modernism, unquote, an uncritical acceptance of the values of the modern world. It includes blind faith in technology, inordinate attachment to material gadgets and conveniences, uncritical acceptance of the march of scientific progress, devotion to the electronic media, and a lifestyle dictated by advertising. I don't know that there's a quote that could be more apropos to the moment that we kind of find ourselves in culturally. And I think it's becoming a lot wider known about the addictiveness and the downsides of a lot of these gadgets that probably weren't invented at the time the book was written. I'd love for you to comment on that last quote specifically. You say you'd like to write your own DSM 111 along with the following sentences there. Any feedback or any additional commentary or context that comes to mind when you hear that read aloud?
Well, yes, I forgot that I wrote that. Of course, that was a long time ago. But yes, I think what it reminds me of is that I do think that many of the things that we take for granted in our world are neurotic, basically neurotic. So they should be included on a list of disorders. For example, being so devoted to our machines and neglecting our humans around us, that's crazy. That is highly neurotic. People doing that should be, immediately sent into treatment. I mean, that's the way it is. It's neurotic, but we take it for granted that it's okay. There's so many things like that. The devotion to celebrity means that we lose. I think it means that we suck the soul out of ourselves when we put so much into celebrities. Like we're putting all of what the Freudians would call affect or libido into other people instead of finding it within ourselves. We don't understand. We don't appreciate our own celebrity. We don't realize that each of us is a celebrity. We each of great value, and we don't need to pour out all of that attention on somebody else just because they have money or fame or they've made a movie. That's no big deal, really. Yeah. But we put it on these other people or on sports people who are usually in their lives not very exemplary, And so what we need to do, I think, is if we want to have any celebrities, they should be people of great compassion or great intellect or heart, but not the way we do it. Those people, with the people that we put all that celebrity onto, but they steal in a way, the love, the libido from us, and we need it for ourselves. So that is also a big problem. It's a problem that requires some therapy.
Yeah, I know. Just in my own life, in an attempt to kind of alter my own habits to get into circumstances and environments that are less tech addicted and distracting, it is very difficult these days to find consistently find environments that are analog, that don't inevitably contain the gadgets and the devices and the distractedness. And for me, it's often of just a few, solitude, which you talked about earlier, just being able to kind of relish in time by yourself. Swimming pools where by definition electronic gadgets can't really exist without breaking, workout classes where humans are together kind of pushing themselves, maybe libraries. And I guess this is something I remember hearing you say in interviews that I was watching before this conversation about how I would imagine this is related to what you loved and have fond memories about your time in being a monk, is the space for holiness. And I remember as a kid personally just going to Catholic church before I really understood anything about what was being said there, that there was just an internal sense that this is a sacred place. It's a place where people come to be quiet and to listen to music and to stop the chaos of their own life for some contemplation and reflection. You've spent decades of your life talking to people who have come to you for venting and advice and guidance and feedback. What do you see now, or what have you seen in your life that you think are consistently leading to the neurosis? And some of it's probably contained in that quote I just read out, but just in terms of practical advice or feedback for modern people who are caught up in this culture and are trying to have some semblance of the holy or the peaceful, um, what pieces of feedback or advice or observations do you have for people who are they may not be religious in the traditional sense, but they do have a hunger for the elements of spirituality that I think have generally always been there with human beings?
I really focused on this in a book a few years ago called "The Religion of One's Own,"
Yeah.
where I tried to explore. It's an issue of great interest to me. How do we find a religious life in our world today without when the religious institutions have failed us essentially in so many ways? I think one thing we can do is again return to the sacred. Where I live in New England, and I think that the transcendentalists of New England, Emerson and Emily Dickinson and Henry David Thoreau, it taught us that you can be religious in a world without the institutions, and Thoreau thought it was best, and so did Emily Dickinson, through nature. And one of the first major writings of Emerson was called Nature. And he also gave us a very famous address to Harvard University, where he also emphasized the natural world and its magic and its blessings and its holiness. So that's one place we can look. We can look to nature not just as material, material for our own purposes, but as a place of mystery and teaching. The nature can teach us how to live. So that's a very important thing. And so I would say that although of course I'm interested in climate change, but climate change is only a small part of preserving nature, because we need nature for our soul. We need nature in order to continue to be human beings. That's one thing. And the other thing is, I'm not really against machines and technology. I think we are developing in that direction, and we need them, and we can use them and enjoy them. I love writing on my computer. It's, anyone tries to take it away from me, they're going to have a problem. But on the other hand, you don't have to surrender your humanity or see that, look at our future and say, well, in another 100 years, just think of all the new machines we're going to have. My question would be, how are marriages going to be in 100 years? What about raising children? Will we be able to do that better? What about having streets that are safe to walk on? Things like that. Those are the things that matter. Those are matters of soul. So I wish that we could not just reduce everything to machinery. That's our mistake. It's not the technology. It's the way we deal with technology and let it dominate.
Fair. I know this is another, comment that I remember hearing you say, and with probably the most famous interviewer on the world, when you talked to Oprah, and you were, basically, I think, making the argument that you view the exodus on a large scale in the West away from organized religion as a great thing, and an indication, if I remember correctly, of your words, of maturity, of a maturing civilization. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that idea and what you see happening right now, as by the tens of millions, the children of my parents' generation are leaving Christianity by and large, or organized religion in general. What you make of that, And if it is in your mind a great evolution or an opportune moment, how can we make it opportune? What are the real opportunities here?
I think that yes, the institutions, not entirely through their own fault, though I think partly because of their own fault, are they're not keeping up their retrenching, and that's to their detriment. But I think that the rest of us, what we have to do is discover how to grow up and be more mature. So many people are religious in a childish way. They mouth things they learned when they were kids, the Catholics from their catechism, and that's not what an adult needs. And so we have to grow up and get away from that. There is a mama and papa. The Pope is the papa, il papa in Italian. He's the Pope. He's the father. And Freud said that we have a father, in our notion of God. We have to grow up and not just relate to the world in any way, even in relation to our own parents, without separating from parents. We need to be individuals and adults. That means shaping our own religious and spiritual lives, and we can shape them. As I said, you can shape them through nature. Another important way you can do it is through the arts. I think the arts are very close to religion, and if we could bring, I don't think most people understand what art is all about at all. But it's a very profound thing. In a way, you were talking about archetypes before. I'd like to talk about that as we go along somewhere.
Absolutely.
Because often misunderstood. But I think that the images of art they're living images that we can relate to. And they're not just pictures of the world. They're not just representations of anything. They are revelations of the invisible world that we live with every day. So the arts are almost religion. They're very, very close. And I think that that's another way in which we could grow up, by making the arts more part of our lives, but appreciate them not for the artist's skill or making celebrities of the artists, but of realizing that the arts allow us to engage our dream figures. The mysterious figures that come in our dreams come in paintings and sculptures and music and plays and things like that. And it's very, very, these things are sacred, the plays and paintings and so on. We don't know how to relate to them. The religions of the world do teach us how to do that. For example, in India, people talk about looking at a painting as darshan. That means a holy encounter with one of the great invisible figures of life, one of the great mysteries and powers of life. You go to look at a statue, that's what you encounter. And we don't understand that. So that's another place. I can't go into all of it, but those are two areas in which we could direct our attention and find the sacred and not need the traditions, except I do think it's important. The traditions have so much beauty and so much of value. We could still be nourished by them, but as authoritative sources and as moral authorities, I think that time is over. It's a good time, and that's a good thing. We have to find our own morality and our own ethics.
Yeah, I get the sense that many people are trying to do that right now, and they're hungry for a North Star or various North Stars that can lead them to an iteration or a better ethical framework through which to live one's life. When you look around and you see the country, I know you live in New England in the US, who do you see living wisely in that area of life? You mentioned nature, you mentioned the arts. I don't know if you have a label for yourself in terms of how you identify or don't identify religiously at this point, but I'd love to get any commentary you have on that, of where people might be able to look for wise instruction in that area.
There's a lot of bad instruction around. I can start with that. You have to be careful. Don't buy into so much. There's so much that so many people that present themselves as, knowing all of that. And I'm disappointed most of the time. I would say that today people would be, I don't know, I can't expect people to do what I do. I don't know of any modern people really to follow. I don't have anyone that I follow that way.
Hmm.
I here and there, some talent and some wisdom, but generally speaking, I don't see it. And so therefore, I think that's the dead poets are the thing we have to rely on. And that's the play, The Frogs by Aristophanes. They have to go for the dead poets. And I think that's where we are. So I read Emerson and Thoreau and Emily Dickinson, and I read so many of the old, people have gone before us, it's been proven that they're, over time, that they really have something to say. I follow them. I read the Tao Te Ching every day, practically. I like reading Thomas Merton, the Catholic monk. I do in a certain sense still consider myself Catholic. I don't want to give it all away to what contemporary Catholic leadership is doing. So in that regard, I think that we'd be better off studying. I think that one of the things that we could learn to do from the monks is to study and learn. I don't know if people realize that study can be part of life today, and collecting really good sources for our study. That's the thing you have to do. You have to learn what's good, and teach yourself, learn, rather than just go to a workshop somewhere where someone is probably giving you their own complexes, which is what I tend to see. So I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't trust that. I trust I tell people sometimes I don't read a book that is has newer than 500 years ago.
Yeah. I got that sense too, and learning about you, that you're big into the Greeks and the antiquity, and you mentioned Emily Dickinson,
yes,
the Renaissance,
yes.
and
Transcendentalists, yeah.
For people that may have read that and some of that in high school, but really haven't visited it in 15, 20 years and are now adults,
Yes.
They may agree with you. They look around and they see, I thought that was very well put, that a lot of modern internet gurus are really just inflicting their own complexes on their audience. Yeah, again, like you've mentioned, the arts as a component, nature as a component of what seems like a wise and beautiful life. Are there any other principles or insights that come to mind when you read those authors, when you read those poets, when you read the Tao Te Ching? What else would you offer to a modern audience who has that hunger, but like you might be suspicious of the modern answers that are given by people who are alive today?
Well, the main message of the Tao Te Ching is to not to push, not to force anything. Let life. They say let things take their course, and if you can if you can live your life that way, where I would say read the signs. Like I told the story of hearing an angel speak when the head of my department told me I shouldn't continue in the life of a college professor. That's a kind of, looking at things differently than just literally and factually.
Yeah.
And I learned that by looking, whenever I go and when I travel, I always go and look at paintings of the Annunciation, where this angel appears to the Virgin Mary and says, you're going to be pregnant. It's like a message comes. And you look at some of these paintings of angels, and they show these ribbons of words coming out of their mouths. It's as though they give us words that are angelic words. And so that's a theological way of thinking. But I'm taking this great teaching of the Annunciation, and I'm making it part of my life. I'm saying that sometimes I hear, when people speak to me, I hear that must be the angel speaking. And I also know from the story of Islam, one of my favorite stories, where I've mentioned before, where the angel comes to this man and tells him to do all these things, and he just follows he follows whatever the angel says. He just changes his life every time. And at the end, he becomes a holy man. And people come to him for direction and they say to him at the end of the story, how did you get to be this holy man with all this wisdom? And he says, well, I can't tell you. It's too hard it's a story I can't tell. Because all he did what the angel said. Now, if we could live that way, if we could read the signs and move with that faith in life and move in directions that are not all directed by our ego, by our self, let's get rid of all that stuff and that's a more religious thing, to read the signs, to obey rather than to have to be in charge all the time. So there's a way of looking at some traditional religious teachings, but taking them in a new way, in a deeper way, for our own daily existence.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think, this is something that I remember Jim Hollis mentioning during my conversation with him. And I know he's sort of famous in his niche of that world for the idea, which he may have very well gotten from Jung, that the first half of life is one inevitable giant mistake. That is the role of that phase of life is to develop enough ego strength to be able to survive in the world, and that the second half of life is often a different phase and a different calling. I think people are trying oftentimes to rectify and balance their own ego with some of the aspects that we've talked about during this conversation, whether it's their spirituality, whether it's listening to serendipity or signs that I think you would look back on your life and say were instrumental in having you become who you are. How do you think about that interplay between one's necessary ego for daily life, and then also leaving space for something slightly more mystical, something that's more in line with the sacred? I'd love to get your thoughts on that too.
Well, I think you have to live more as a mystic, really. That's if the ego for daily life has a place, it's minor. It doesn't have to be it's not that important. What's really important is the myth we live, the deeper story. Everything we do every day, the slightest thing, is related to our deeper myth, the deeper story, the narrative that we are not in charge of, that we have to, that comes to us. When I look at my life, we've been talking about it. I think that I'm amazed at how things have come together for me without my direction. I thought I would stay home with my family, and I loved my family when I was a kid. Absolutely loved that wonderful family. And I left them. I departed from them, for good, really, when I was 13, so young. And I was homesick for about 5 years. I just couldn't, and pain in my heart, just physical pain of homesickness, did all that. But I felt this is my destiny. This is, something else is directing it. So when I woke up one morning and said, well, I've done this, I didn't work that out in my mind. It was an awareness, and it was time to follow a new direction. So I did, without knowing where to go next, not thinking it was a smart thing to do. It was a dumb thing to do, really. I didn't know what to do. And the same thing all along when I was fired from the university. This was a sign. I've got to move on, now I've got to move in a different direction, because I'm not obviously writing this story. It's not my story to put together. I have to follow it. I think that's the essence of religion, to follow, to obey rather than to have to be in charge all the time. I think that's really a big, huge principle of life, whether you're going to have a sacred life or a secular one. You don't choose when you live a sacred life. You follow and you obey.
You may have just answered this, but this is something I'm glad you brought up again, which is the concept of religion in general. And probably the best way to ask this is just to ask it simply, which is, how do you define religion or religiosity? I'd love to get your just general feedback on that, which I think you've already alluded to in some ways.
I think religion, in its essence, is the individual and communities uh, responding to the mysteries of life, the mysterious in life. That's mysterious is the most important thing.
Hmm.
There are so many mysteries in this world, and we ignore them. We think we can make everything. Like, let's say you get sick. Modern medicine treats your sickness as something going wrong in the mechanism of your body. People in religions around the world in older times understood sickness as a message, really, as one of these messages, the angel appearing and saying, "You're going to go in a different direction now, and you better pay attention to this illness, and realize it has meaning. And it's not just a physical event that just happens."
Hmm.
It can't be explained that way. One of my colleagues years ago, Ivan Illich, was a Catholic priest at one time, became a philosopher. And he used to say he wanted to die of death. He didn't want to die of any illness.
Hmm.
And that's how I feel. I think that what he said there is very profound. It has to do with, in his teaching also, with everything, that we have to be human beings, first of all, so that we are not going to die from some illness that a doctor proclaims. We're going to die because it's time for us to die.
Hmm.
And I think that mystery of the approach of death, thinking of it as this mystery that we now have to encounter, or illness as this mystery that we have to deal with, or meeting someone and now this mystery, we might want to get married. That's a great mystery too. Or having children, tremendous mystery. I've been involved quite a bit actually in the birthing movement, trying to get people to humanize and bring soul to birthing, as well as dying, because these are moments that are sacred. And if you're going to live a life of soul, then you don't treat them as mechanical things, but you treat them as mysteries, and that's religion.
Yeah. And in those moments, and you've already talked about some of those, what seems like more religious moments in your life, perhaps the most notable, at least during this conversation, was the decision not to fight the rejection from SMU, which led you into a completely different type of life and has led you in many ways to write the books you did and, have this conversation today. Do you mark that up as intuition? That it's people would be wise to trust that instinct, even if it flies in the face of, modern wisdom that you might be receiving from your peer group. How would you, give words to those moments that are maybe triggering a necessary leap or, decision that may not make a ton of sense or requires a degree of, faith, whether you regard that in a religious context or a secular one? How do you think about that?
I think about it religiously.
Yeah.
And I use my own background in religion. So I've been saying to you that I listen to the angel. I believe in angels. I'm not naively, not stupidly, not literally, but I do think that there are moments that we come to where we are kind of pushed along, and we come to a point where our future is revealed to us, our destiny is revealed to us in some way, and we can respond to that. That's a very religious way of looking at it, but I'm not going to church to do that. I'm not following their rules and saying this is how you have to believe and this is how you have to live. I'm learning from the religions that this is how it works. And they call them angels. And, well, it's a much better word to me than intuition, because the intuition puts it in ourselves, and like some talent we have, almost like, like there must be something like an intuitive brain, something organ relating to it. I'd rather use religious language for it, loosely and or deeply, rather than literally and naively, the way religion is often used. It's very hard to talk about because it sounds, people could hear what I'm saying and think, oh, how stupid, and what Is he still one of these naive Catholics? No, but I still may be Catholic, but I'm not naive. And I do feel that part of our life our getting along in life is to have a religious life. And many of these existential religious experiences, like obeying what the signs that you see, that's a religious act as far as I'm concerned. And you may go to the religions and learn from their stories how that happens and how they imagine it. And that can be very fruitful to you. But you don't have to go and believe in it. You don't have to sign up for that religion in order to do that. You learn from the religion, and then you take it to yourself, and you see how you experience that, and you create a life that is more a religious life. But it is not religious by going to a particular church.
Yeah. We talked about this briefly earlier in the conversation, and it sounds like it's something that, still, is important to you and resonates with you, which is archetypes. And, I've had conversations on this show about a lot of different subjects. And one recently that has come up a couple of times is men in America, men in the West, and the issues that I think a lot of men are facing. Jim Hollis said that when he started doing therapy work 40 years ago, it was 9 women to 1 man, and now it's inverted. I talked to a guy named Richard Reeves who wrote a book called Of Boys and Men recently, and it's all about the data of the decline of men in virtually every area of society. And one of Richard's points during the conversation is that the script for what it means to be a man now is a bit ambiguous for a lot of, especially younger men. And that in the void and in the vacuum of that reality, there are internet personalities that are coming along and acting as digital father figures or, little gurus that people begin to follow their every word and kind of worship them. And I'd love to give you some space to talk about, archetypes in general, maybe from antiquity or from, hundreds of years ago or religion, that you think are important for us maybe to keep in mind, especially related to men. I don't know if anything comes to mind with that specifically. I read the name of the book about archetypes that I'm likely going to buy pretty quickly here, but I just want to put that to you and give you, a little bit of time and space to talk about what archetypes are and how they relate to, how we might think about a life well lived and, another way of having maybe a North Star for conduct, for ethics, etc.
Well, this is a complex topic. Remember that when I talk about archetypes, that again, I'm not going to follow Jung.
Yeah.
I don't follow Jung that closely. I have great respect for Jim Hollis. I saw him not that long ago, and really love his whole being. He's a wonderful man. But he's Jungian, and I'm not, and we're a little different. So the archetype for me is closer to Hillman's work, where Hillman says that his archetypal psychology is not a psychology of archetypes. It's an archetypal psychology. That means we can look at any image archetypally. We can look and see anything at all. I could do a little riff on your microphone probably and see it as an archetypal image. Anything, anything at all is capable of being seen as an image that opens up the world to meaning in a particular way. So it's not so much that there are these archetypes around, but that, and this is why I also differ so much from Robert Moore's work about the warrior and so on. I mean, I think it's great work. It's great to do it, but I differ in my approach to it. So they're not these particular archetypes. I do in my own teaching, I teach mythology and talk about the role of Hermes and Aphrodite and Artemis and Hermes in our daily life. Those are mythic images, and I guess you could call them archetypes loosely, but I'd rather save that word because it tends to then give us these too limited notion of what an archetype is.
Yeah.
It's something very deep that really moves us, and so there may be an archetype of a teacher, that might be an archetype that we're only looking at the teacher archetypally. Really, we're saying that there is a way in which the image of teacher enters into education, let's say, and the real teacher is not that person up there giving us information. It's that teacher enacts, and almost like he's on stage, and brings to life the archetypal teacher, the power of teaching. Teaching is one thing human beings can do. Archetypes are things that human beings can do. They're powers of human beings. And so we could take anything, the midwife archetype, if you want, the secretary archetype, everything is archetypal from a certain point of view, but you see that it is not literal. It's not just because someone is playing the role doesn't mean that they are the one doing the work. They are able to elicit and evoke this mystery teacher, this mystery secretary, this mystery interviewer, this mystery person. And so what's going on here is mythic. It's not just what is available to plain sight. So that's an interesting way of looking at things. Hillman was particularly good at looking at mythology as archetypal, that is, as being able to, let's say, the image of, he did some great work with the image of Hermes, for example, that when we're trying to communicate, as you and I are doing here, we would be very well off if somehow between us we could evoke the image of Hermes. And you read Hermes and among the Greeks, because that's where you get that name, and you find that that all these qualities of Hermes, if we could have them here in our conversation, we would have a Hermes power in our conversation that might have an effect on a listener that's quite powerful, more than what you and I can actually do ourselves. But we have evoked and we have made present the mystery, the Hermes mystery. And that's why myself and many others have studied mythology to try to do an archetypal description of human life and human experiences.
I know I talked to a few people who are interested in your work and was indicating that I was going to be talking to you over the last couple of weeks. And, to play devil's advocate here, right? So this was a case study that had always stuck with me from, Psych 101 classes. And to some degree, I'm kind of going through this in my own personal life right now, where I have a very close friend who is battling an extreme mental illness right now. And I'm witnessing in real time what can happen to a brain in a circumstance in which it is in a radically altered state. And it is as though I'm watching one of my closest friends for the last 20 years embody the same physical entity, but there's a totally different person in there. And it reminds me of the story of, Phineas Gage, which had always stuck with me from college, who was I think a railroad worker in the 19th century, who was a mild-mannered pastor, deeply conservative man, very well respected in his community, who had a metal rod through an accident blasted through the front of his brain. And he never lost consciousness after the accident, but who he was before that happened to him and who he was afterwards were two completely different people. Who Phineas Gage became afterwards was a, drinking, womanizing, foul-mouthed, irresponsible person, someone who would be almost unrecognizable to the man his friends would have known before the accident. I feel that way to some degree in what I'm witnessing in my own personal life. And to give the modern scientific lens its due in terms of the way that, we are trying in a sort of consilience way to understand what it means to be human, what it means to have a soul, have a brain, and how that brain can be and soul can be perturbed based upon what happens to it physically. How do you respond to examples like that when people, are curious about the the soul in general and how that concept can really fit into circumstances like that? And there are instances of multiple personality disorder where the beating heart rate of people who are flipping from one personality to another are seemingly like different people living inside the same body. I just knew that was something I wanted to put to you to get your feedback on in terms of somebody who has thought a lot about these concepts and souls in particular.
Well, first of all, there is obviously an interesting relation between body and soul. I mean, we can be sick physically, and it can certainly affect how we feel, what we can do, how we might behave, our personality, and so on might be affected by that. That's part of life. It's certainly true. The physical, but just because we have a physical impetus to affect us and change who we are, doesn't mean that our soul is not there, and that we can't do therapeutic work with the soul. Even in those circumstances, it can be done. I've worked with people with, I know sometimes some people say that doesn't exist, but with multiple personalities, and so affected not only by physical problems, but like brain, but also by tremendous abuse.
Yeah.
A great deal of abuse can also make a person behave in a way that they are not themselves, or complexes can take over a person, partly due to the way they were raised. Then, and that's also part of the story. The story of their life is extremely important, and to who they are. So they may have these complexes that these, like Jung called them, sort of minor personalities within the psyche that come forward, and the person has no control over them. I think we all have complexes that can affect us any day. An inferiority complex, I think most people can get into easily. You meet someone who reminds you what you haven't done, or what you don't know, and you might sink into that inferiority complex. And there's no way to get out of it. Mm. Or you might feel jealousy in a relationship. You may feel this jealousy or an envy, and it is so strong. It's so strong you just can't do anything, and your whole life is twisted by it. So that person comes into therapy. And what you do with that therapy is take a long time. I think that takes a long time. With the kind of therapy I do, it takes a while. And but we explore that, and we especially explore the many narratives that are at work in a person's life and personality, and eventually probably find a way to get through the jealousy and deal with that maybe recurring inferiority. That can be done in a therapeutic way. That's the beauty of psychotherapy, to be able to work with that. So it doesn't take anything away from the soul. It's just that there certainly is, there definitely is a relationship between soul and body. And Aristotle said, that the soul is in every part of the body. And there's a way in which when the brain is affected, or maybe even another part of the body, sexual body might be affected, or muscle, or walking, things like that. These have a tremendous impact on us. And I'm suggesting, as I said a while ago, that medicine might want to look for the soul in those problems and not just the physical solutions.
I know we're getting a little bit close towards the end of the conversation. I want to thank you again for doing this and giving so much of your time to have this conversation. Um, I know you mentioned this earlier in the conversation that you have, I think you spent something like 40 years of your life being a therapist. And, I'm wondering, I asked Jim Hollis the same question. When people were coming to you during that time period and showing up and telling you their, most intimate details and problems of their life, what kind of themes, and maybe this is related to the quote I read from your book, Care of the Soul, about how, modern addictions and technology can really take away from a meaningful, soulful life. What kind of themes did you notice that were recurring, if any, that come to mind over the time period when you were, acting as a therapist? And I guess this is a way for me, kind of in closing, to try to get any other, feedback from you or advice that you might have for modern people who are seekers or who are suffering, that, would love to talk to you one on one, but probably never will, and would love to get any wisdom or feedback that you might additionally want to share.
Well, one thing is when I say we, I mean people doing the kind of work that I do. We talk about going with the symptom or going into the symptom. That's a kind of little, what do you call it, little slogan that we keep in mind in our work. So that I think is a key thing. I think if more people understood that, we'd be better off. So that when you have a problem, let's say your difficulty is you are depressed. Let's say you're depressed. That's the thing that's bothering you. We would say that the thing to do is not to fight it, but rather to try to go with it in some way. Try to go, hold that depression. Don't just try to get away from it. Try to be close enough to it to be able to get to know it a bit. And when you stop fighting it and are with it, it may be less controlling. And eventually you might be able to find a way to, first of all, to coexist with it. And ultimately then to have that depression morph into some strength. That it can do that. It can morph into a strength. Same with jealousy. You can learn from jealousy how to be a much better friend and companion with someone if you can go with it, stay with it instead of say, oh, we got to get rid of this. And how can I get rid of it? That's something that has been really, that I have seen in therapy over and over again. My clients know. I still do a little therapy. I do, I have a half dozen people that I see. And they know that that I'm going to be, in every case, I'm going to be sympathetic with their problem, that I'm not going to try to get rid of it. That's not my way. And I find that is, it's very much like the Tao Te Ching again. You don't force it. You don't force your way to try to rip something out because you don't like it. What you do, or you don't think it's healthy. We have all these biases. If you could more stay with the symptoms as guides as to where we need to go, then I think it can be very useful. And that's one thing. That's one principle. It's not a particular issue that comes up, but that's a principle that I use all the time, and it really helps me.
Yeah, Thomas, this has been a real pleasure for me to do this. And maybe in closing, I'd love to know, and I'm sure the people listening to this would love to know, what's next for you. What is still, interesting and exciting? Where do you think you're going to be, allocating your time and energies in the coming year?
Well, I'm 82 now. I'm beginning to feel a slight, I can't say slowing down. Actually, things are speeding up. But I do feel age as having an impact. On the other hand, in most ways, it doesn't. So I am right now working on 2 books. I have one coming out in May, I continue to write. I've written too many books already, but I just can't stop. And
Hmm.
I just have so many things I want to put down, and I enjoy putting words together so much. Writing is a great treat for me. It's something that I don't get much of a chance to talk about, but I love writing,
Hmm.
and I love the whole process of putting a book together. So I have a book on emptiness coming out in the spring. Stories of emptiness, traditional religious stories, made for the most part about emptiness, which means it's called shunyata in India. It means a deep sense of a hollow in everything you do, that you space for mystery and the mysticism and the things you can't talk about, the invisibles.
Hmm.
Uh, Putting all that mystery and emptiness into your life it's very traditional, important teaching in the East, especially. And so I've put that book together, and I'm writing a new one. I'm starting now on Henry David Thoreau, pretty much not about him, but it's called The Cure at Walden Pond.
Hmm.
And I see that he made a retreat. He made a retreat just 2 miles from town where he lived,
Hmm.
to go into this little cabin on a pond with a lot of people around him. I mean, he didn't go off into the mountains, but he did go on retreat, and he did it so that he says so he could live deliberately. I think that he was such an interesting man. I think that he has a lot to teach us about how to deal with these problems we have today.
Fair enough. I've been there. It's a beautiful spot.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you again so much for doing this. I know you don't do a ton of these interviews, seemingly, so it's a real privilege again to be able to do this. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure. Absolutely.